Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining our webinar, The New Work Paradigm Considerations for Organizations Operating in India, presented in partnership between the Legal 500 and Trilegal. My name is Alan Cohen. I'm a research editor at the Legal 500. And before I hand over the webinar to our impressive panel, I will give a brief introduction of today's topic. As the title suggests, we will discuss what employers need to know about resuming work in this post-pandemic era in India. We will dive into a number of questions to understand common concerns around returning to the workplace, hybrid work models, and tackling employee engagement and health issues arising from the new work arrangements. And our speakers will share their insights and provide practical guidance to help you align your corporate strategy with the latest transformations in the workplace. But first, let me introduce Swarnima, who will lead us through the discussion today. Swarnima, I don't know if you want to say a quick hello to everybody who sees who you are on your screen, on their screen.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the session.
Hi. So Swarnima is a partner in the employment practice at Trilegal's Bangalore office. She's worked with domestic and international clients in a variety of employment matters, including structuring employment contracts and policies, handling disciplinary issues, and advising on the effective management of resignations and terminations. Swarnima has assisted her clients in formulating workplace preparedness and resiliency plans during and after the global pandemic. She's also collaborated with NASCOM, which is the National Association of Software and Service Companies, to release a discussion paper that sets out the challenges faced by companies with multi-state employees in light of varying state labor laws, the issues relating to remote and hybrid working, and the potential solutions to overcome these challenges. So I'll hand over to you in a moment, Swarnima, but before that, I would like to let our audience know that this session is interactive. So if you have any questions at any point during the webinar, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will put them to the panel once the presentation is over. Okay, since Swarnima, I'm handing this over to you now. Feel free to introduce the topic further, introduce the panelists who are joining us, and just lead the conversation, get us on the way.
Thank you for the introduction, Alan, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. So, while Alan did set the context, I'll just talk briefly around how we have structured our conversation today. We have divided into two broad topics. The first one being return to work. I would say return to offices, physical offices, and preparing for the new normal, right? We intend to discuss some of the frequently asked questions. Something that I'm asked on a daily basis nowadays is, the health and safety issues, vaccination, of course, can it be mandatory? How do we implement that? And the newer forms of disciplinary issues and matters we are seeing with remote working, and how do we address that? So that's the first part. And the second part of the discussion is where we are going to discuss more about the future of work. Is remote working something that's here to stay? Are organizations really considering full remote working? And of course, we can't discuss future of work without discussing the labor codes, which is something we've been hearing about for a while in India, right? So the gig workers, freelancers, contract workers, and also the 4-week day, which we've seen a lot in news reports. So we'll discuss some of these aspects in the second part. As Alan mentioned, we intend to keep this interactive. It's a free-flowing discussion, so please feel free to drop in questions. We do have a Q&A round at the end of our discussion, but we'll try and bring up the questions during the session as well. So without further delay, let me start the first part and introduce our guests and panelists for the first part of the discussion. Shreya, Hasija from Akzonobel. Hi Shreya, welcome to the session. And
hello. you so much.
And we also have Nidhi Parekh from Citibank. Hi, Nidhi.
Hi, Swarnima. Hello, everyone.
So just a quick round of introduction. Shreya is the Integrity and Compliance Manager, South Asia Pacific, has been associated with Akzonobel since 2015. She joined Akzonobel as a legal counsel where she was involved in regional commercial issues and has handled various claims and litigation, including, of course, legacy employment matters. And given her role, she has been at the forefront of the various challenges on bringing employees back to the workforce, workplace, implementation of the various health and safety measures and transition from the pandemic to the post-pandemic era. Nidhi, on the other hand, Nidhi is a director at Citibank Singapore. She, again, has been with the Citi group since 2015. Nidhi took up a challenging role. She took up the site head role for the global legal office in Mumbai. And that role started just at the onset of the pandemic. So that's where she's had on-ground complete exposure to, dealing with the lockdowns and the slow opening up of the offices, getting people back, vaccination drives, the second wave, which we all remember how dreadful it had been. So with that, we intend to have an interesting round of discussions with both Shreya and Nidhi, bringing in some interesting perspective on these issues. Right now, before we get into this and we get into our discussion, we have, I want to run a poll and get your thoughts as audience on the question that is one of the, I think, the most commonly discussed issue. And if we could run the first poll here.
Yes, I'm going to pull that up.
Right. So you'll have the poll in front of your screen. The question is, what has been the biggest challenge in bringing employees back to the workplace? Options, no considerable challenge. Employees are eager to return to work. Employees prefer to work remotely as they have relocated to their home base or other cities. Employees prefer coming to the workplace, but only for a few days, and want to retain the convenience of working from home. And this could be just not having to commute. The reasons could be that, or it could be your personal commitments, but are more open to a hybrid working arrangement rather than a full office work. And the last is employees have raised health and safety issues. So all of you can choose what is closest to you, what you believe is most true for your organization. We'll give it a couple of minutes and then we can see the poll results.
There's got a few people that are participating. That's looking pretty nice. Right. Swarnima, do you want to give a few more seconds?
Sorry, Alan?
Sorry, do you want to give it a few more seconds? Or should we end the poll now?
Yeah, I think we can end the poll.
Okay, so just a couple more seconds and then I'll end it. Okay.
Okay. It seems like no considerable challenges has got the 0% vote. So everybody is definitely facing issues in this area. And there is a close tie between people who have relocated to their home base and other cities and people who prefer coming only a few days a week. Now with this, I think I would want to hear from you, Shreya, Nidhi. What have your experiences been? And Shreya, maybe we can start with you. Akzo being a company where you have both, manufacturing units and offices. right? And the requirements, of course, are very different. The solutions are very different. What is the current model that you all are looking to? How did you manage to implement some of these? What was your challenges and hopefully solutions for us to hear?
So, Swarnima, as a company, I think what really worked for us is that we tried to be very flexible in our approach. That was the base, I would say. We actually now also have a official hybrid policy in place, which of course means that we understand that people now are used to working in a certain way, and we, do not want to go back to a full work from office mode. Of course, it depends on the role, etc. But generally, we do give a lot of flexibility. We have a hybrid policy in place where, of course, one can work from home a few days and then come to office a few days. The underlying principle being one, that your role should allow you to work from home. The roles should be such in that manner, and of course, your manager needs to be aligned with what you choose to do. Again, as you said, we are a manufacturing company as well. So the workforce in factories, of course, needs to be there for the production to happen. So due to their very nature of work, they were called to the sites, to the factories. However, all COVID protocols were followed, and even shifts were created for the factory workers, and rosters were created for the office workers, and that's how we've been managing. That's the approach we've taken as a company.
Sure, thanks for that, Shreya. And Nidhi, how have you all gone about it?
Almost similar lines, because we also are a financial institution, and the way we need to operate again gets guided a lot by our regulators in different jurisdictions. In fact, there are certain roles which have to be resident roles, in the sense that they can be performed only from site. So I would say this has been an evolving space since the time of the lockdown, and a part of it, yes, there was a part of the population which was still coming to office with all the COVID protocols in place. There is a part of population who could absolutely work remotely, and there is, yes, a part of population which is hybrid. So at an institution level, I would say that these are the three categories that we are broadly looking at. But everything depends on how the situation is evolving in a particular region, in a particular country, how the developments in terms of what are the regulatory developments and what are the permissions granted in those countries by the regulators. So I would say, in a nutshell, we've been very flexible around this, and thanks to the colleagues who have been dealing with the labor laws and with the regulators on day-in basis. And overnight, things were changing. Overnight circulars were coming to really speed up with those circulars and changing the protocols and ensuring that the infrastructure is very supportive for the employees. So I would say these are all my thoughts as a recipient, more on the side as a person who was really seeing what was happening rather than being a part of the group who is creating these changes. So I can only thank that group at Citi who actually was going through all of these circulars on day-to-day basis and implementing some of these policies and protocols.
Thanks. And what I hear from both of you is, it seems there's a classification at some level of roles that are on-site, roles that are hybrid, and roles that can be done fully remote. Right. And that's been my experience as well with most organizations who've gone about with that classification and then rolled out different policies based on that. Now, here, have you all had challenges on the classification, like employees questioning the classification itself? For example, if you have taken a position as an organization that this is an on-site role, an individual coming back and saying, no, I believe this is a hybrid role and therefore I should be allowed to work from home on a 2-day a week or a 3-day a week basis. And how have you all dealt with that?
I could go first, Swarnima, on this one, because for us, the approach was really bottoms up. So a lot of feedback was actually taken by way of surveys from the employees, from the respective teams, to say, how do you envisage your role in this institution? Do you think this is an on-site role? Do you think this could be remotely done? Or do you think it's a hybrid role? So I think that saved a lot of energy and effort, and that back and forth where it could have been a top down and people would have just pushed through their decision on them. So this was more like bottoms up, where people were sharing their inputs and really on ground what they felt. And that's how I would say a lot of decision making will come and has come over a period of time in terms of categorizing different roles. For all of us, be it for legal, be it for even other product functions, including on the business side as well. So it was all, the feedback was taken from them, and accordingly the categorizations were done.
Right. And Shreya, what has your experience been?
So firstly, at the outset, I would like to say that we had not seen such a concern or any big challenge, to be very honest. But I think the reason for that could be because I think the approach our company took has been very preemptive and flexible in that manner right from the beginning. Because in our policy document itself, we have left the discretion on whether the role can be done remotely or not to the managers itself. We've really decentralized the process in that regard because because the managers can, I think, know best if their direct report can work remotely or not. What are their daily roles? What do they really do on a day-to-day basis? So, for example, if we say employees in manufacturing units need to be at the site all the time, I'm sure, there must be a role in which one can work from home at that site as well. Or, for example, not all sales employees are supposed to be on the field all the time. There are sub functions within the sales organization as well, which can work remotely. So I think the idea was to take this flexible approach so that really, one, ensured that the upper management is not taking decisions with regard to hybrid working that was not aligned with the specific roles. And two, I think we were also empowering the managers a lot by taking this approach. So that's how I think we were able to manage any concerns, if any, coming up.
Just so overall, Swarnima, sorry, just to add over here, overall, I think there was a big cultural shift in people accepting that really work can be done remotely. If things can be done overnight, then yes, the flexible working hours. In fact, it was all actually for Citi, if you see, we saw an increased productivity, an increased number of hours were being logged in by employees, and we were concerned about that. So we didn't have a problem otherwise where there was a lot of absenteeism. In fact, if there were, that was only because of COVID, and therefore we started tracking it to ensure that people were not falling sick and were not being traced. But there was just overworking, and we were more concerned from that. And there we had to put in initiatives to ensure that people are being encouraged, even though they cannot travel, but still please take time off. Please do not overwork yourself. It could involve like taking just time off and just sitting in your house without having the worry to log in. So I think that cultural shift was a good change, because a few years back or before COVID, if anybody would have said, okay, on a Monday I want to work from home, you know how the answer would have been. Forget about the corporates, even for law firms. And I think it would be good to know how the law firms kind of implemented that cultural change.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And it didn't seem difficult at all. It was so seamless. It works so well. In fact, I think I'm much more efficient when I am at home because there are lesser distractions around. So yes, I think some change, and that's a positive change. I take that as a positive from the pandemic. But to circle back to the question, and I think a response to the audience to the poll, what I'm hearing is both of you have successfully managed to roll out a hybrid model without much pushback. And to me, what comes across as the key takeaway has been the bottoms-up approach, empowering the people manager, empowering the employees to have that more granular, individual specific discussions on what that role can do and cannot do, rather than having a 360-degree high up their policy and says, this is what it is. And that to me seems like a solution which is a good takeaway for all of us here. Right. Now, one of the concerns, and I think about 6% of the poll results also said that there are concerns around health and safety. And I've had that. People have come back and said, listen, I have parents, old parents living with me, or I have young children who are of course not vaccinated, and therefore I am concerned about coming to the workplace, right? Now, with health and safety, we know, and Nidhi, you pointed it out, the circulars were coming overnight. I mean, I remember the first few months we used to start the day typing out an advice to the client, and by the time we were ready to send it, there was another circular that would be there. So we would rework the health and safety requirements. So and I've had, I mean, there's been thermal screening to the 6 feet distance to mandatory masks. It's relaxed a lot now because early this year, a lot of state governments relaxed those requirements. Even the 6 feet distance is to the extent feasible. But some questions I've had regularly from clients is, how do you enforce mandatory masking? Like today, again, in Karnataka, it's again mandatory. Those cases have been on rise. So these requirements have been reintroduced. And we know the reality on ground. You walk on the street and you don't see it being enforced as strictly. So how have you all managed it in your offices? Have you only restricted it to common spaces, or there's a strict requirement around this? And also I would be curious about the social distancing, be it when you're going to the cafeteria or other common places. How have you all managed some of the health and safety requirements?
So if I may jump in on that one. So of course, a lot of measures have been adopted by our company as well on health and safety in general. And if I talk about specifically about the implementation of the mandatory physical guidelines or government SOPs that came out, like 6 feet distances or masking, etc. So I can at least say, in our company, it was followed to the T, in the sense that rosters were created to ensure only certain number of people are in the office at a time. Markings were made, everywhere, not just on the common areas, but, even inside the meeting rooms, the chairs were crossed out. Some of our chairs or the open desking system also were crossed out, etc. Regular sanitizations were happening. Sanitizers were available throughout the office. Things like foot pedals on the doors, for example, things like that. And temperature screening at the entrance, checking Arogya Setu for contact tracing, etc. And that's something which is happening in our office till date. It's not that if you step out of your house, you see some relaxation in place, but that hasn't really translated to our offices. And to explain this better, actually, I will set some context here. So Akzonobel has 3 core values, and one of them is safety. And Akzonobel is extremely serious about it. To give you an example, COVID, non-COVID, we are not even allowed to talk on the phone if you're walking in the corridor, or we can't even look at our phones. We'll be reported against, or some colleague will immediately come into, to tell you that, this is wrong. You cannot do this, and they'll instantly correct you. And so with this example, what I want to really explain is that safety is so ingrained in our system as an Akzonobel employee. Even if I'm out in the market, if by mistake I'm walking and I look at my phone, I'll feel instantly guilty, and I'll just put back my phone. And so that's the standard Akzonobel has set for safety. They do not care for your safety only when you're inside the office, but also when you're outside of it. So with this background, when we say, or when we spread awareness, or when we're training the employees, honestly, it's not very difficult to tell them, you have to wear masks and you have to follow this physical distancing, because we are already very, very strict about a lot of other things around safety. And also, if I'll delve a little deeper into this topic, and I'll specifically talk about the factories as well. For factories as well, all of this, what I said earlier, screenings are done at the entrance. Only people with masks are allowed. In our factory specifically, we follow this, what we call as the behavior-based trainings. So those are conducted at sites, and even behavior-based observations or reporting is being done on a daily basis. If there's even a very minute non-compliance around safety, and not just COVID safety, but general any kind of a safety. If there's even a very small incident, our safety colleagues have to mandatorily report it in the global system that we have. So, then we also have this peer-to-peer observations, and then, again, things like markings on where to stand, etc., screening, and all of that. So, our factory workers, because of the very nature of the risk involved in working in factories, I think I can say that they are even more well versed of the safety standards than maybe I am today sitting here as an integrity and compliance manager, because they do go through those trainings on a daily basis.
That's really interesting. I mean, I didn't even think looking at the phone and walking was a safety concern till you mentioned that. So yes, I that gives us the context in how seriously you're looking at it.
I'll just add to it by saying it wasn't very different for us as well, because I think the second wave of COVID brought a lot of individual awareness, and that's when people also started coming in after second wave. So between first wave and second wave, there wasn't too much of a footfall in office. But post second wave, when there were a little bit of relaxations and people were coming into office, I think that individual consciousness and awareness was so high, and people were so scared that we didn't have to really impose upon them. Yes, there were enough messaging done, whether it's through email, blast emails, or it was through cutouts which were kind of put across the meeting rooms, common areas, washrooms, pantry, etc. So there was a constant reminder to them that they should maintain social distancing, there should be masking. The lifts, the number of people who could enter into the lift at a point of time was being regulated. So there was a person who was actually checking how many people could enter into the lift. So I think all of that was there, but it all became successful also because of the individual awareness that everybody was following and was very, very cautious about. Just to bring a little bit of context from a global perspective, and because I also transitioned during that phase, like as we were I entered into a role in India at the time of lockdown, and as the restrictions were being lifted, I handed over that role and moved to a new country. And here, when I came into Singapore, initially there were self-testing was mandatory before you would enter office. And it so much happened that when one of my colleagues was sharing the story that he entered office thinking now the restrictions are relaxed, so he did not conduct the self-test on that day. You wouldn't believe that the executive assistant actually came running to him and gave him the self-test and said, no, conduct the test right now. I'm standing here, and upload the result. So it's just, I think there were checks and balances in various formal, informal ways. People were like, if you were being little careless about it, there was somebody else to remind you about it. So I think it worked out as a very, very much like a collaborative effort where the institution was imbibing that environment that it's required, it's not a something that you like to do, but it's something like a necessity today. So yes, that was our experience. And I also saw like two different countries having a different stages of their compliance protocol, I would say.
Thanks a lot for that. And I think talking about health and safety, the biggest and the most talked about issue is vaccinations and mandatory vaccinations, and different countries taking different approaches on that. But before we get into that, let's run our poll question, Alan. Let's run the polls 2 and 3, maybe starting with poll 2.
Absolutely. I'm preparing it. I'm going to launch it now.
Right. So has your organization made it mandatory for employees to be vaccinated as a condition of employment? And what I'm also hearing is as a condition of being hired, right? Options are yes, no, thinking about it, no intention to impose a vaccination requirement. And we'll just give it a couple of minutes.
Yes, absolutely. Letting people answer. People are still responding, so maybe a few more seconds. Okay, Swarnima, I think it's okay now to close it, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay, ending it now.
Yes, we can see the poll results. Okay, so we have 34% who are thinking of it as a condition of employment. That's interesting, and I didn't expect that, as that's a high percentage, and 45% saying no. Okay, and Alan, before we discuss this, maybe if we could run the third poll as well.
Absolutely, doing it right now. Okay, everybody should see it now.
And this is more about entry into the premises. So has your organization made it mandatory for employees to be vaccinated as a condition to entering the workplace? Again, same options, yes, no, thinking about it, and no intention to impose such a requirement.
All right, I think we can stop it now, Swarnima.
Oh.
I'm going to share the results.
Yes, this is something that I thought as well. A very high number, saying yes, it's mandatory as a condition of entry into the office. Now, the legal position on this has been a very interesting one, and this has varied across countries. Now, in India, the central government guidance is that vaccination is voluntary, it's not mandatory. But we have time and again seen various state governments come out with circulars imposing the obligation on employers to ensure that their employees are vaccinated. There have been rulings in the Meghalaya High Court, the Guwahati High Court, setting aside some of these orders, saying it's unconstitutional because it violates your fundamental right to, fundamental right to life and your body, also a fundamental right to livelihood. But in many states like Maharashtra, Telangana, there were these vaccination orders till very recently, and they were not challenged, right? So they continued to be in force. It's only recently this year, May, we had a Supreme Court ruling on this, where the Supreme Court said, yes, the government has the ability to come out with reasonable restrictions, but it needs to be balanced with and proportionate to the requirement. And given the number of cases now, it's on the downhill. I mean, there are lesser cases now, and therefore it's not proportionate to impose this. I remember in Bangalore, when we entered shopping malls, we were required to show vaccination certificates, and court said, no, you cannot make it mandatory as a condition of use of public resources or a condition to deny right to livelihood, right? Now, what does this mean for private employers? My interpretation of the judgment is that even if a private employer is coming up with a requirement saying that we would terminate your employment if you're not vaccinated, that could definitely be challenged because of the way the Supreme Court has looked at it. But if it is as a condition of entry into the premises, that is something that we can still justify from a health and safety perspective, provided there is an alternate, like they can work from home, they continue to get their salaries, there is no detriment to that extent. So that's really how the case law on this has evolved. As of now, most state governments have withdrawn the mandatory vaccination orders, so those are no longer in place. But I've seen many companies continue to make it mandatory as a condition of entry. Right now, I'm interested here in Shreya, what has your approach been, in terms of making it mandatory? Have you had a pushback from the employees? Right, and if yes, how have you dealt with it?
So to answer your last part first, fortunately, unfortunately, no, we did not face any challenge or pushback here as well. Having said that, we were prepared if such a scenario would have taken place or arisen. So there could have been easily be a case where someone saying, no, we don't want to get vaccinated. And we were very clear that the approach we'll take, because again, from the government point of view, it wasn't mandatory. So the approach we took was that we'll be counseling the employee. And we were very, very clear about that since the beginning. We'll be counseling the employee in the sense that though it remains his or her decision, but their decision to not get vaccinated can put people around them at risk. So we were prepared to do something like that or to take that approach. But did we come to that? No, we did not face any such challenges. Again, the approach we took from a vaccination perspective was that it was open for the office going employees to get vaccinated. And however, for the manufacturing unit employees, because all of them had to be at a physical distance to each other, we did mandate to see their vaccination certificates. And even at our manufacturing sites, we did not receive any pushback. Through our internal surveys as well, actually, I'm told that 99% of our workforce is vaccinated. Though, you know what, Swarnima, I think what really helped for Akzonobel was that we at a very, very initial stage had tied up with a third-party provider to conduct company-sponsored vaccination drives. At our office sites and manufacturing sites, there were these vaccination drives that took place. And we also, with the same service provider, with the third-party partner, we also made it very, very easier for employees to find vaccination slots at a place of their choice. So at that point in time, if you remember, it was very, very difficult for us to get vaccination slots. And in my personal opinion, I think that could have been the major excuse, so as to say, of not getting vaccinated, that what, I am not getting a slot, I can't go through this. So as Akzonobel, we really made it very, very easy for the employees to get access to it. Either you can come to one of our drives and get it for free, or you can get it at a place of your choice and get it reimbursed through the company. Simultaneously, of course, we also generally we take a approach of motivating and encouraging employees to get vaccinated through our awareness campaigns and training campaigns, I think, which also really, really helps in employees to be more open to get vaccinated. However, in conclusion, we eventually left it open for the employees to get vaccinated in India. And because I also have a regional role, I can say that this was not the position we took for other countries, because some countries had made it mandatory and for us to collect that certain set of data, where we had to, for example, in Australia, Singapore, I noticed that we had to collect that data whether you're vaccinated or not, and then things went from there. But yes, again, for factory workers, mandatory, no pushback. So I think I need to give like a special mention here to our HR and admin teams for their unrelenting background work that went in this project. So yes, that's how we dealt with it.
Thanks, Shreya. And Nidhi, how has your experience been?
I think just being a part of a global institution, you would expect that you cannot have one approach that fits for all. So the same thing was the situation for us in different countries. For example, like in US, after the second wave there were very, very stringent measures which were taken to the extent that our CEO went live to state that yes, people will be put to paid leave, I think for 30 days on. And then also if they don't get vaccinated, they may get terminated. So there were strong messages coming, but again, I wouldn't say that trickled down equally to say countries like India, because a very different approach was taken for India. And again, the good part was each senior management of each particular region was communicating the live on ground situation, and accordingly the calls were being taken. For India, yes, it was mandatory, at least for while entering the office premises. You need to be vaccinated, Arogya Setu app, or you need to have adequate tests done. If it was like a few months back, people were also required to conduct tests and carry the results of it before they would enter into office. But I think as of today, if you ask me, maybe we don't know. The situation is evolving. Has it been a part of our hiring process as a condition, I would really doubt. And even with the Supreme Court judgment, I don't think situation would have changed with the judgment, but even before that, I really doubt we would have taken that stringent measure for new hirees, because I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, we were on a hiring spree, and just in our center of service excellence, we have the export unit of where we actually like exporting services across jurisdictions. Uh, we hired almost 3 times the number that we would have hired in 2020. So that wouldn't have been possible if we would have really kept vaccination as a condition. And I don't see a reason for that, also because for all legal and practical reasons, I think. Also, based on the surveys that we conducted for our employee population, I think we had a mixed result in the beginning, but that changed substantially after the second wave. So whilst I don't like to call any silver lining to the second wave, but it was really dreadful. It really scared people very much, that even those who thought it's a voluntary thing and thought they would take it at their own ease, I think everybody landed up finally to take the vaccine shots, and they would have preferred if it was even allowed for their kids and like elderly people, unless there was any other medical advice given. So I think that's something, the way the situation evolved over a period of time also contributed to the success of vaccination. City itself, like Shreya's organization, we also organized drives for the first dose, for the second dose. And all of this was being reimbursed as part of our global medical insurance plan. Not just that, even the tests that were being conducted, that could have been reimbursed as part of your annual medical checkup. So I think this tie-up with the insurance and the third-party service providers, plus the continuous engagement at every level with the employees, highlighting the importance of vaccination. Choose the vaccination that you want. Like, there was no hard and fast rule about that, but that just highlighting that importance of vaccination. And also maybe like there were certain, at times we would have those brainstorming sessions by people who had contracted COVID and recovered very smoothly because of the vaccination. Those stories were being shared publicly with people, like, and this could have been through way of newsletters or blogs, which again helped in sensitizing people the importance of vaccination. So I would say I really doubt we would have gone to the extent of mandating that as a hiring condition, but definitely for entry into office premises for the larger good, that was put as a condition.
Thanks. And I think that's been really useful. I think effective communication, making things available, those are my key takeaways. But Nidhi, one thing that you also mentioned as testing being an alternative to vaccination. And that's a point I think is something I've seen a lot of organizations consider. And here, just for the benefit of our audience, there's also been a Bombay High Court ruling which says that organizations can impose testing as an alternative, and so much so that you can also pass on the cost of the testing on the employees, which I have seen organizations do, and that also in a way encourage people to get vaccinated. So that discussion is really useful. And I'm just conscious of the time, and I have one more question and topic that I want to cover with you all, and there are a flurry of very interesting questions as well. But what I have seen in the past 2 years is really interesting, innovative disciplinary issues come up. I mean, from moonlighting, where in the context of remote working, where and this is with multiple organizations, where an employee is an employee of one organization and holding a job in another organization simultaneously, to interview frauds where, and this has happened more than once, where the person who appeared for the job interview is different from the person who finally joined, to, of course, the job abandonment, unauthorized absence, or even virtual sexual harassment, right? So we've seen different types of disciplinary issues in the last 2 years with remote working. Your thoughts, have you all experienced any of these? How have you all dealt with it?
So I think my perspective, Swarnima, on this is I think the problem would arise if one would lose engagement with your employees, and that's how or why they would lose focus with the company's overall vision and strategy. So I think our organization, again, taking that preemptive approach or proactive approach, really did invest a lot in a very structured engagement program. So I'll not go into the details of it. I'm conscious of the time, but we had a program called Connect, Care, Capability, Culture, where we really worked on, making sure that the leadership team is connecting to the last mile, etc. Forums like Chit Chat Cafe and all of those happened. But, in terms of the major issues that you're stating, as a compliance manager, I think I would say that these issues are more about integrity than anything else, COVID or no COVID. The focus on integrity, doing the right thing every time, each time, even when no one is really watching you. I think that's what I talk about as an integrity and compliance manager, and that's what Akzonobel preaches as well. So at the end of the day, we, as an organization, really leave it to the employees, that you just have to deliver your task. As long as the outcome is there, we'll measure the performance basis that. So in conclusion, no big issues. We did maintain a strong focus on integrity through and through, conducting drives, awareness sessions, our integrity week, etc. So all of these things have been continuing. The remote working did not stop those initiatives, and I think hence through that preemptive approach and employee training awareness, no such disciplinary issues were faced. And wherever there are such integrity issues, we do have, like a separate confidential whistleblowing channel where such wrongdoings, if it occurs or is observed, is reported. So but yeah, nothing specific to COVID related remote working.
Sure.
Yeah, I think again, same, likewise, I don't think we had moonlighting or like two people doing different roles in two different organizations. I mean, one person doing different roles and simultaneously in two different organizations. That way, even though we hired quite a bit of people during the lockdown, I think the processes were not lagged in any manner. So the things which would have not happened maybe through, say, wet signature or through hard copies was still happening through handwritten notes. So I remember, like, when I moved the roles during that time, and when I joined this role during the lockdown, I actually submitted a handwritten resignation letter. So it wasn't that you, just because you can't take prints, you can skip one of the requirements of your offboarding formality. You had to do it. There were just different ways of doing it. Certain things which you had to comply at the time of onboarding into your new role, there were proper given, like, grace periods which were given, and it was tagged to your profile. So you would get notification time and again to say, this is something which is pending. It's just a reminder. As soon as you're heading back to office, you will have to submit it within X number of days. So I think the processes which tightened up very much. We didn't have issues like this, but like any organization, yes, there were certain disciplinary issues, which again were handled in the same way. Like you would have handled them if you were on site. So, and then this now sounds a little funny, but I heard other organizations also face this. When slightly the travels opened up, some of the people tried to claim their LTA, the leave travel allowance, by fake receipts. Now, again, a lot of institutions face that just at the beginning of that restrictions being opened up. And those are just not acceptable. So they were dealt with in the way they would have been dealt with even otherwise. So I think COVID didn't change situations, but yes, it just brought into consideration and highlighted certain red flags. And again, the reminders were sent, communications were sent, people were made aware, disciplinary actions were taken around that. So.
Sure. And thank you so much. And I know we can continue discussing some of these issues and delve deeper. Maybe we can have another round of discussion sometime soon. But I would like to thank both of you for your time today. And I think my key takeaways have been, I think, preemptive approach, communication with the employee engagement, bottom-up approach. I think all of these have been some of the reasons, I would say, for the success story. So thank you, both of you. And with this, I think we can move to our next segment.
Absolutely. Let's move to the next session. Thank you very much, Nidhi and Shreya. It was remarkably interesting. Speak to you soon. Please go ahead, Swarnima.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
So moving to the next segment of the seminar, as I said, the next segment is on the future of work. We've talked about the challenges with the current work, remote working, etc. Now, future of work, of course, what the pandemic has taught us is remote working is possible and is possible in most roles. Many of our clients are considering a permanent remote model. If not, of course, hybrid is something that's definitely being considered. And when we talk about the future, as I said, we have to touch upon the labor codes. I know a lot of you have already typed in question on the labor codes, and I think the most important is the effective date. But those are some of the issues we intend to touch upon. And for that, joining me today is Aditya Prakash. Aditya is a lead employment counsel at Google India. And prior to joining Google, Aditya was, and I would say continues to be, an integral part of the Trilegal employment team. So he was a lawyer with us, and in his current role as the lead employment counsel for Google, he advises on all employment legal operations and in matters for Google. So thank you for joining us, Aditya.
Thank you so much for having me, Swarnima, and thanks for that kind introduction. I think that first session was very interesting. I think we all could have done with another 30 minutes of that conversation between you, Shreya and Nidhi, but yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think the first question, Aditya, and this is something you must be asked a lot, is because Google is always looked as the trendsetter in the industry, right? So what is your current working model? Are you looking at hybrid? Is remote working or fully remote something which is there on the cards, something that you all have been discussing?
Yeah, thanks for that, Swarnima. Yes, very frequently asked question, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the reports on that as well. So, I think as a starting point, as a company, I think Google believes deeply in the value of interpersonal interaction at the office. I think our leadership has communicated that before as well. Obviously, and also as part of, internal surveys, hearing from employees, what we've heard is something that over the past 2 years, employees have missed out a lot on is those very interactions at the office. It's not just the interactions amongst employees, but just the interaction with the workplace itself. With the Google office, it is a certain type of experience that everybody does look forward to in the organization. So, just taking all that into account, at least I think our primary philosophy is, being at the workplace, interacting with each other, sort of drives innovation, helps with all that creativity. Now, all that said, obviously, I think we can all agree, at least in this forum, we can all agree that, there comes a certain flexibility with, being able to work from home. We've all experienced it, and we do like a large part of it. And so really, I think where we finally landed on is trying to balance between these two, because we do have, a large part of our workforce wanting to come back, have that opportunity, but equally also wanting to have that flexibility. So our current working model is a majority of our employees, as we call Googlers, have the ability to work from home for 2 days in a week. And for the other 3 days of the week, they do have to come in. And so it's a hybrid working model. Obviously, that applies mostly across the board, but you could have, and I think Nidhi and Shreya covered that as well, you could have certain roles where it's not possible to perform the role from home, and therefore people are required to come in. That could be either because handling certain types of data, or people working at data centers and things like that. So I think that's definitely been our model for now. That aside, fully remote working, again, is not something that's been entirely ruled out. We do allow for it. Of course, depends on various factors, depends on the role. I think as a starting point, it depends on the product area, or what we call product area, or you could say in general parlance is the business vertical. The leadership in that vertical being okay with that sort of a model where someone can work remotely. So there is that opportunity, people can apply for it. Obviously, it goes through a vetting process. the manager needs to approve, like Shreya and Nidhi also said, happens in their organizations. We also have a legal and an HR sort of vetting stage, to ensure that we have all our compliances in place for enabling someone to work out of that location. And then, so I think overall, we do expect that, around 20% of the workforce globally might be working remotely at some point of time. So yes, that's definitely there. But I think as a general model, hybrid is what we do have. Just broadly beyond that, if I can take another minute and explain, I think beyond that, we also have a model where we allow employees to work for 4 weeks in a year from anywhere. So you can work remotely from anywhere for 4 weeks in a year. And I think ultimately, at least what I've realized over the last 2 years as we've worked on a lot of these policies is, just trying to understand where people are coming from, looking at your own experience as well, right? So even with return to office, we do have, and we did have for our offices, a specific date within which people needed to come back. But it isn't a hard sort of hard stop. There could be reasons someone's a caregiver and they need an additional period of time. So we've had cases where someone's got a 4, 8, 12-week extension in order for them to be able to return to work. And I think the last piece is also, I think like Nidhi mentioned as well, cities hired 3 times their of their workforce over the last 2 years. We've had that same sort of hiring trajectory. And so it's also recognizing that you have this significant population that's never had a chance to meet their colleagues, never had a chance to actually visit the office, and they've been working remotely right from the start. And I think that we do see value in giving them that experience, because that is a huge part of the experience of working at Google, being able to go into the office. So I think all of those considerations have played a role in the hybrid model. Obviously, I think, and this is probably a question I'd like to pose to you is, obviously with the fully remote working model where companies are considering, I think one of the big questions on everybody's mind is, how do you manage compliances, right? At least as compliance, people and employment lawyers, we understand there's your professional tax, which is state specific. You have your leaves and holidays, which are state specific. And there are, I know, case laws, obviously you're the expert on that. There are case laws on, how what applies where, but how do you see that playing out as companies start to go fully remote if they make that a call?
Thanks, Aditya. And yeah, and you've really hit the nail on its head, because that's the question everyone has been asking. Now, yes, fully remote sounds really good, and keep the HR aspects aside, even from a legal perspective. Now, India being a federal country with both state and central laws, the question that often comes up, say, if I have my office in Bangalore and I'm allowing my employee to work from Hyderabad, do I now start to comply with the laws in Hyderabad? And there have been cases where courts have said yes, because it's the place of work of the employee and not really where the office is. Now, that, as you can imagine, throws up multiple challenges, because if you allow in all the states in the country, just administratively keeping a track of leaves, holidays, and contributions is next to impossible. Now, I've seen companies take different approaches on this, and there is the first category who are taking a conscious risk-based call, and saying that, listen, we need talent, and we will allow people to work from anywhere, and we will just apply the laws of the office location. Now, that's one approach. And then the second approach are organizations who are saying that we want to take not a very conservative approach, but also a middle ground, right? So what we will do is identify those 5-6 locations where we know we'll get talent, do an analysis of that and map out our policies, our benefits, so that our leave policy matches the requirements in those 5 locations, our holidays are aligned, etc. Right? That's the second approach, which is the middle ground. And the third approach is, which is again something that is, I would say, more common with the larger MNC clients that I'm seeing, is continuing to say hybrid working model. So you have to be in the base location. You can come to office for 2 days a week or 3 days a week. But by that, you ensure that they are working out of the same state. and therefore you're not triggering laws of other state. Now, well, this is a very, broad brush on the approaches companies are adopting. We did bring out a discussion paper along with NASSCOM to and suggesting some of the policy changes to the government to address this issue, possibly suggesting a telecommuting law could be a good solution to some of these state-specific challenges. And when we did our research, then we saw that in US, for example, they have a very similar challenge as ours. There were case laws which brought out the distinction between employee requesting for a remote working versus employer requiring a remote working. So is the company telling you you go work in Hyderabad, or the employee is saying, please allow me to work from my home? And the company need not even know where they are working, right? And we were hoping that there would be case laws in India which clarify this. Now, thankfully, last year in November, there was a Kerala High Court ruling which adopted this similar principle. And they said that when it is at the convenience of the employee, then the laws of the office location should continue to apply. So that was a very, I think, a positive ruling for the employer. Now, what is the convenience of employees becomes a very question, which is, you can stretch it, because many organizations today are coming to us because it's also a business need. They are realizing that you cannot get talent only in Chennai, where your office is, say, for example, and you want to have people in Bangalore or in Gurgaon, and you want to hire from them. So it's a mix of a business reason versus a convenience. So that becomes a far more nuanced assessment. But one approach I'm seeing organizations adopt is, and more of a practical approach is, put the location as your office location and the employee's request for the work, so that you position is as an employee's convenience rather than a business requirement. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying, no, that's a great point. Yeah, Swarnima, I think that makes sense as well, because if the primary argument is around convenience, whose convenience it is, I think at least capture, and I think we can agree that if it is genuinely at the employee's request, the only way to capture that is to actually put that in the contract. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
And I think one question that I have for you, and I'm seeing that, and I read some news reports about Google as well, and question comes. So when you're allowing people to work from remote locations, can I go ahead and have different salaries for them, right? And we see in the US, we've seen some companies do it. Just the argument being cost of living in Bangalore versus cost of living in a tier 2 city is very different. So can I reduce some of the allowances? So just in terms of, you mentioned you don't have many remote working employees, but are there thoughts around having a differential pay, both in India, outside, and as an employment lawyer, what are your thoughts around? Can that be done?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Swarnima. So I think in the US, we do have, we do have that. It's been implemented where, depending on the location, the pay does differ. Obviously, it's an evolving subject. For now, at least in India, that is not something that's being, considered. I think more generally on the question of, can an employer have differential pay depending on where someone's working, or if your company is moving to remote working, can they then decide to have differential pay? My view as a employment lawyer in general would be that it's possible. Obviously, it's something that you have to agree to under contract, and you have to keep certain things in consideration. For instance, minimum wages, depending on the organization, minimum wages does become a relevant factor. Under the Provident Fund law, there is that requirement around not reducing wages in order to reduce your PF contribution. Again, I think a lot of that can be addressed through the contract. They're not, red flag issues as such. So I would say yes, it is possible. Obviously, from a legal perspective, from an HR optics perspective, whether companies would choose to do that or not, obviously, is a company specific question. But it's not something that's being considered at the moment.
Right.
At Google for India. Yeah.
But you did mention that it's something that's being considered in the US.
Yes, it is something that's been done in the US. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and that's been my experience as well, that In India, it's just been at the discussion stage, but like you rightly said, it's a matter of contract. So it's something that can be done, but there are multiple things to really think about. Okay, and I think when we're talking about future of work, right, we have to talk about the gig workers and freelancers, because that's something we've been reading about a lot. And generally, I think in the last few years, individuals have valued most is flexibility. And I think I see more and more people want versus, there's a shift from the job security and wanting a job security to flexibility. And people are getting better talent in that engagement. For companies, it has a beneficial approach because, obviously there's more flexibility when you're engaging gig workers, right? The labor codes also do now include provisions on gig workers and has some benefits. So what are your thoughts on this? Is gig worker, freelancers, is something that being considered something that is the future of employment really? And again, I will always ask you questions as an employment lawyer. Where do you see that play out with the codes?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Swarnima. I think you're right. We've definitely seen a lot of discussion around it. I think within India itself, and of course globally as well, with the pandemic, and if we're talking classic definition of gig workers, we've seen, delivery personnel. There's been an increasing need for it. Lots of companies in that space, having increasing need for that classification of workers. So I definitely think it's a growing area. Like you said, obviously it depends on the nature of the role as well. The way I look at gig workers, I think over the past few years, gig workers has maybe been pigeonholed into a very specific type of worker, someone working in an aggregator type model. But I don't think it's necessarily that. To me, a gig worker falls under the larger subset of an independent contractor, right? Because effectively, it's the same type of an arrangement. I think, as far as whether there will be more discussion around this, I definitely think so. More legislation, like you said, the labor codes do talk about a social security scheme. In fact, I think I read very recently that I think in July, the EPFO is actually meeting to put together a scheme, under the codes for gig worker social security. So I don't think it's long before we'll see a draft scheme at least out, which talks about what companies need to do for gig workers. And one of the key things there that'll be interesting to understand is, one, how is the government looking at, or how are the government departments looking at what a gig worker means, right? Because if you look at the codes, it's used in the context of aggregators, but is it only aggregator related gig workers? Is it anybody who does the same type of work? And in general, otherwise also, I think, like there's been a recent, there's a Supreme Court judge who recently, in fact, made a statement saying there needs to be more labor law coverage for gig workers because they're not covered. So I definitely think it's a space to look out for. Obviously, it's more relevant for companies that will have roles, in that space. But yeah, there's going to be a lot, I suspect. I mean, in the same context, though, I think the other thing that the codes, cover is the whole contract labor arrangement. And we've obviously had the CLRA for the longest time, and it's had not necessarily gone through too many amendments, but at least my reading of it has been that there seems to be some changes in the scope, just in terms of who a contract worker is, what the coverage is, and things like that. So I just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say, the one of the top issues under the labor code to look out for would be contract workers. I think if I were to rate the issues under the labor code, to me, the first is wages, which of course everyone is talking about, and the impact that has. But contract worker comes a close second in that priority. I think it's going to change quite a bit after the codes come into force. And it can be broadly the good and the bad. I think the good news for many of our clients is that the scope of who is contract worker is reducing. Now, under the current Contract Labor Act, there is no distinction between services contract or manpower contract. So, whether it's Google providing a service to another company and, highly qualified tech engineers performing that role, or whether it is an organization supplying security guard or housekeeping, all of them fall within the purview of Contract Labor Act under the current law, provided, of course, you're working from the client's premises. And therefore, there is a requirement to get a registration and a license. And there was constantly, over the years, there has always been a pushback from the industry saying that the scope should be limited. It should not cover white collar employees. It should only cover, where manpower employees, right? The court has tried to address this to some extent. And what it has done is the definition of contract labor is now much narrower. So if someone is providing their regular employees, so people who are already on the payrolls of, say, Infosys, Wipro, Google, and they are into a service agreement with a client, they have sent their employees to perform that work, that would not fall within the definition of contract labor, right? What would fall within the definition of contract labor is if the company goes to a manpower agency and says, I want these qualifications, will you recruit someone and deploy them to my premises? That's what would be covered. So that's now, I would say, when we worked with clients on this evaluation, and brings down the scope of who falls within contract labor by about 20-30%, right? So there is a much smaller group of people to whom this law will apply once the code comes into force. The second positive change has been the threshold has increased. Now, under the current law, it's 20. So 20 or more in your premises. And many states have amended it. It's 50 in many locations. With the courts, it's becoming 50. So 50 or more in the premises, that's where the law and the requirements would trigger. I think the bad news is that engagement of contract labor will be prohibited in core activity. And that's where it's becoming far more, people are having concerns, because we know how common it is to have agency workers, contract workers in your offices. So what really is core activity? Essentially anything for which your entity is set up, and anything which is perennial, anything which is routine. So for a tech company, of course, your software engineers, technology folks, but also HR, recruitment, tax, finance, because all of them are integral functions to running the company, right? So as a blanket, engagement of contract laborers would be prohibited in core activities. Now, in India, currently, there is a similar prohibition in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So we'll see how that pans out once the code comes into effect. There are a few exceptions, of course, where it's a general practice in the industry to engage contract workers, or where there's a specific requirement. For example, an employee has gone on maternity leave, and I want to find a replacement for a temporary period. Or suddenly there is a new client project, which is for a short term, which needs me to have a higher bench strength, right? But I don't see that project being long term. There, I could engage contract workers. So there are exceptions to this, but there is a much narrower scope to engage them in core activity, right? Now, given this, what I would suggest organizations to do is start looking at your contracts more carefully. Start looking at your contracts, identifying where it is contract labor and where not. And when I've done this assessment for quite a few of our clients, we look through like 200, 300 contracts, and we then could take out about 150 of them outside the scope of contract labor itself, just by restructuring the way the contracts were worded and the arrangement was worded. So that's the first approach to do this, right? And second, with the remaining, then we need to sit down with the business team, work with them and understand the requirements and see how we can make them fall within one of these exemptions. So I think it's a very close work with the legal team, employment lawyers like you and me, working with our business payroll teams, and then looking at solutions to see how that can work.
Thanks, Vanma. Yeah, that's a really interesting take on the codes. I think we'll just have to wait and see how the authorities interpret it as well, and maybe take it from there.
And talking about the codes, I think we can't ignore the newspaper articles which say it will become effective 1st July. I mean, just for the audience here, from my discussions with the authorities, people in the department, everyone has said even they are not aware of this date. So we don't know if it's a real credible date that we can rely on. At least there's no official announcement yet, and right. But I think, and I would like to hear if you've had different, heard something differently on that, Aditya. But the other thing I've been reading in the newspaper reports are that with the labor codes, you can now have a 4-day week, and you can change the working arrangement. So, and this 4-day week has been something that's been, constantly coming up. People have been talking about it as one of the new ways of working. Now, is this something that Google is considering? Are you all considering reducing from a 5-day working model to a 3-day or a 4-day working model?
Sure, thanks, Vanma. So I think on the first point, the codes itself, I mean, I think we can all agree we'd all like a little bit of a heads up before the codes get rolled out. I mean, just going on precedent, or at least general precedent, I would, imagine that all the states should be rolling out their state-specific rules, and that's not happened yet. I mean, I think there are a handful of states that need to still come out with their rules. So I would imagine it's only after that the codes come in, but we never know. Obviously, I don't think I think we've seen a few news reports. I don't think we've seen any, government officials or ministers actually issue a press release to that effect. So, yeah, I think we're all just waiting to see, but hopefully there's a little bit of a heads up, obviously, given all the things we need to ensure are in place. On the 4-day work week, I think that's not something that, or what's being popularly called the compressed work week. It's not something that we're considering at the moment, certainly. I mean, obviously we've just moved into the hybrid work week. That's working well, but obviously people are still transitioning into it. So I think the focus is really there. So we're not really looking at the 4-day work week at the moment. I guess my question would be, and I've been curious about this. It's fine on the one hand to say 4-day work week, but how does that play out? Because if someone's going to be made to work 12 hours a day in order to make it a 4-day work week, that could be breaching your daily working hours, for instance. Your spread over limits. Overtime could be applicable on a daily basis. So how do you view that? Is that even legal? And what are the challenges with something like that?
Yeah, that's exactly my thought on it. I mean, I don't see this requirement on daily and weekly limits changing with the code. Yes, the codes now also have provisions. So now we have a central law which will have provisions on daily and weekly hours. But that does not mean that it overrides the state law. And that's the beauty of our federal structure and keeps us lawyers busy is the ambiguity in between the state and central laws, the conflict. And the way the courts have looked at it is that both have to be read together. Both have to be read harmoniously. So the daily limits under the state laws will continue to apply. So in some states, for example, in Telangana, IT companies have an exemption from the daily limit. So as long as they comply with the weekly 48 hours, the requirement and the trigger for overtime does not arise. So there is more flexibility. You can have a 10-day or a 12-hour working schedule for 4 days a week, that you could do that. But in other states like Karnataka, Maharashtra, and most other locations where your daily limits apply, if you are considering a 4-day limit, you are legally triggering the obligation to pay overtime, right? So it's not something that, to my mind, is changing with the labor court. So the position really continues to remain the same.
Yeah, and I think, some of the reports on multiple issues under the labor code sometimes, tend to read that way. But obviously it's more an option versus, is it mandatory sort of a thing also. But yeah, that's useful. Thanks, Varma.
And to my mind, I think that's where if we look at future of work and we look at how organizations are evolving with remote working, we want India to be a place where we can see employment generating. I mean, I firmly believe that the last 2 years has really taught us that you can work remotely. It also, I mean, just otherwise walking on the roads of or driving in the roads of Bangalore has been better when there is, lesser congestion on roads. So I think there are lots of benefits to it, both from a civic infrastructure perspective to employees' flexibility so it's beneficial for the government, beneficial for individuals, beneficial for organizations. And to me, the biggest roadblock that we see is the state and central laws. And I think one of the solutions would be, like we've discussed, and we've discussed various solutions in our discussion paper, but coming out with a telecommuting law or a law on work from home. And we are seeing many countries do that and follow that approach, right? So I think more from a futuristic wish list kind of thing. And we are working towards that with various government representatives. But I think that would be something where we should see labor and employment law go and how we should see it evolve.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
And I think just, and I'm going through the questions here that we've got from some people, Aditya, and there was one question about where you mentioned people can work for the 4 weeks anywhere, right? Is it only limited to India, or is it also overseas location? And I can understand where that question is coming from, because I'm also receiving a lot of these questions where people want to, their families outside India or their spouses outside India, and they want to go and work outside India for some time and then come back. Is that something that is being considered? Have you been receiving such requests, and how have you all been dealing with them?
Yeah, so I think, have we been receiving such requests a bit early, because these are more recent sort of policies. The intent is, of course, that you would be able to be allowed to work from anywhere across the globe. Obviously, like any of the other parts of our working model, there are certain checks obviously that need to go through. As we know, there could be implications from a labor law perspective, a tax implication. There could be various aspects that need to be considered, but that at least is the intent behind having this work from anywhere. So it is remotely across the globe.
Thanks for that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, working 4 weeks from India is an easier approach because the tax considerations are not there. But when it is anywhere across the globe, then you are also not only looking at Indian laws. You're, say, if you have an employee working in the US and you're allowing them, you want to see that it's not creating a permanent establishment risk for your company there, or not triggering any employment benefits. So to my mind, I would say any such request should be closely evaluated. I have seen companies come out with saying that up to 10 days can be allowed. And there's no golden formula to arrive at it, because this assessment has to be done from each country perspective. But just to give you a sense of what we're seeing in the industry. So thank you so much for your time here, Aditya, and sharing some very, very interesting insights about what you're looking at, what the future holds, and where Google is thinking. So thank you for the discussions.
Thank you, Swarnima. Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks a lot, Aditya. Swarnima, I don't know if you want to take a few more questions. There's so many, including some in the chat. So I don't know if you want to take a few now.
Sure, I'll be happy to take a few.
Wonderful.
Questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
we have like six more minutes or so. So please go ahead.
Yeah. Let me see. I think we did address the 4 weeks from anywhere. Any impact of the upcoming new labor code on the hybrid work arrangements? I don't think so, because there are 2 provisions in the code which kind of talk about remote working. One is under the model standing orders for service industries, which says employers and employee can work on a hybrid working arrangement. The second is in the maternity benefit provisions, which say when you're providing creche benefits, it should also be available to employees who are working remotely from home. Now, my reading, of course, of this is that the expectation of the law is not that you have a creche outside each employee's home, because that's just impossible, but more that the benefits should be available to all employees, whether they are working in office or from home. So to answer the question, no, nothing really changes with the codes with respect to hybrid work arrangements. It's something that can be considered, something that organizations have been actively coming up with. And as we discussed with, Shreya and Nidhi in the earlier part of the session and Aditya later, many companies are coming up with their policies on how they want to deal with this hybrid working approach. Okay.
It's tricky because there are questions in the chat and questions in the Q&A box.
Yeah, okay. So there's a question from Jaydev on if employee cannot be vaccinated and the role mandates work from office, how do we deal with it? I think that's a very good question, Jaydev. It's a difficult answer. I would say, see, you cannot, then you would have to come up with accommodation if it's a role that can only be performed from office, because you cannot terminate the employment on ground of the fact that the person has refused to get vaccinated. Because ultimately, the way courts have looked at it, it's an individual's right to determine what medical treatment they want to undergo, for instance, right? So what I would suggest is you could consider regular testing. And testing is, again, a reliable manner. I've seen organizations have a weekly testing for people who are not vaccinated and who have to come to office. Just implement that to ensure things are taken care of from a health and safety perspective.
Maybe one more question?
Yes.
I'm going through them at the same time as well.
Yeah. Okay. So there's one where, the concern is that when employees don't move back, having shifted to their hometown, do we see similar concerns coming to HR? And how have we responded to those when the reasons are related to cost of living and financial aspects? Now, I mean, just from a legal perspective, I would say that, see, our employment contracts does have a provision on place of work. And therefore, as an organization, we do have a right to require employees to come back to work. When there were orders on work from home and mandatory work from home, yes, there were limitations. But now with those orders lifted, from a legal perspective, we do have that right as organizations. The question becomes more of an HR and an approach to employees. I think, I've been reading articles, the concerns being resignation or, having employees leave, and how do we manage that? And I think my takeaway from discussions with Shreya and Nidhi have been just the communication. Explaining to them that the requirement is to come back to office. That's the company policy. Understanding, I mean, financial aspects are something that they agreed right in the beginning. So the employment contract was on the understanding that they'll work from the office. The salary was agreed on that understanding. So just because of COVID, I don't think that changes. Maybe we could consider giving them more time, but ultimately the requirement is for them to come back to office. And that has to be managed by way of individual employee communications.
Great, wonderful. I think we're coming to an end, Swarnima. There's so many questions, sorry about that. I mean, it's great, it's very good. We're sorry to the audience, if we can address all of them, I am going to have to wrap it up. So I just want to say, Swarnima, thank you. I'm just sharing the screen now where we can see your photo and your email address. So thank you so much for the session. That was very useful. I thought a huge thank you to Trilegal, to you, Swarnima, to Nidhi, Shreya, and Aditya, who spoke in the panel. Thank you to the audience as well. If you have any further questions, I encourage you to contact Trilegal, and or specifically Swarnima. Of course, you can see her email address and her photo on your screen. So that's swarnima@trilegal.com. And I hope to see you, or we hope to see you at another webinar shortly. Thank you very much.